Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Before we start with the discussion, I just want to get my guests, Amandine and Andrew, to introduce themselves and just say a very short bit about where they work.
I'm Andrew Sullivan. I'm president and CEO of the Internet Society, which is a global nonprofit that tries to make sure the internet's for everyone.
And Amandine Le Pape. I'm COO and co-founder of Element, and we provide secure messaging, sovereign messaging to government and enterprises. I'm also one of the co-founder of the Matrix.org Foundation, which provides an open protocol for communication. So we want to give the control of their communication back to the users.
Now, let's get straight on with this discussion. The idea that governments need a chief technology officer is kind of appealing in a world that we live in where technology is all around us and is very much part of everything that we do. I think maybe the British government attempted to have a chief technology officer in Dominic Cummings during Boris Johnson's government. That didn't go too well. But if a government was to appoint somebody to this job, what would their to-do list look like, Andrew?
Well, I think their to-do list would really be to get up to speed on the tech, and that's actually part of the problem with this idea. That normally, you know, your CTO is somebody who's got a sort of broad experience in the technology and so on, but you're normally in an organization, you have specific technological problems. Governments have problems that are much, much wider than that. They're trying to address problems that are much wider than that, and they don't really move at the speed that industry does. So I mean, while I understand the appeal of it, the analogy may not be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are two angles, basically. There is the regulatory one, where for governments having a kind of trusted technological reference they can turn to for advice and basic translation from the tech industry to regulation would be one of the to-dos. And then there is the fact that we need someone who is responsible for managing the digital infrastructure of the government, because we see huge disparity on how government deploy new technologies and move away from Microsoft or something maybe more sovereign, or implement fully digital management like Ukraine did in a record time. Like, I don't know if you've seen their app, but it's crazy. People can do anything on one single app, like declare a baby, declare the house bond, get a new insurance on their car, etc. And everything is just in one app. It's incredible.
Now, you mentioned regulation there. We've seen some attempts to kind of rein in big tech or to sort of have umbrella legislation that accounts for the way that technology is impacting society. In the UK, that's the Online Safety Bill, which has had its critics because, to your point, Andrew, it's been slow in coming out and things have changed as it's being written. And it's also tried to kind of jam in every kind of bit of online safety it could possibly get in there, which has perhaps made it so big that it becomes ineffectual. But I don't want to be completely negative. So can we think of some good examples where government has brought out regulation that's actually had a really, really interesting and good impact? And I know, Amandine, you can think of one.
Yeah, you're right, that the Online Safety Bill was interesting, and we've been very active in the discussion and trying to get the regulators to understand the technical challenges and possibilities without a middleman was really tough, and it showed. On the other hand, we have been working a lot with the European Commission on the Digital Markets Act. The goal of the Digital Markets Act is to open up the digital market and basically make the big tech more interoperable, force them to open up to talk to other applications. So, for example, WhatsApp should be able to send messages to other messaging applications from next year. So we've been working a lot with the European Commission there, and we've seen quite a big difference, because whilst it's not completely applicable right now, it's in March, they have started to implement it, and it's been successful because the Commission had actually listened to us, companies and civil societies, telling them, yes, it is doable. And interoperability is what we do with Matrix, and we were able to say, look, we've done it, it exists, and it helped them actually counterbalance the Googles and Facebook coming and saying, this is not doable, impossible, no way. Yes, you can do end-to-end encrypted interoperability. And we have seen that in the Commission, there were pretty strong technical people we've been talking to who were able to actually process what we were saying and confirm to the less technical people that, they're not lying. This is real.
And Andrew, what are your thoughts on those two bills? I saw you were smiling when I mentioned the online safety bill, so I'm guessing you think they didn't quite get that one right.
I mean, honestly, I think the Online Safety Act is a complete disaster. I think that the UK government got everything about it wrong. But I think a more interesting example is the Digital Markets Act and this attempt to get interoperability among communications applications. You know, I'm cautiously optimistic about it. The Internet Engineering Task Force, who make the standards that make the internet happen, they're working on this interoperability standard. But I'm not sure that I would say it's worked yet. I think the open question is whether it's going to work. There is a lot of incentive for the largest players under these circumstances to, you know, throw all their toys out of the pram and go home and say, oh, here's the API, you know, use it as you want. What we really want for interoperability are standards. We want open standards that are not under the control of anybody. And I think it's an open question whether that's going to happen. Partly because the timelines for this were very much a CTO's way of doing things. They gave a deadline and they said, this is when it's going to happen. And I'm not sure that that works across an entire sort of economic sector. And so that's the one note of caution I would sound. But I agree, the approach is the right one.
And with big tech dominating the landscape, do you think that governments have got it right in deciding to look at their monopolies and ways that they can make things more interoperable, break down monopolies in some cases? Is that the focus that government should have at the moment on big tech, or should they be looking more to startups and how to make ecosystems better for them, or do they have to do both?
Oh, I definitely think you have to do both. I mean, but it is interesting to talk about, you know, okay, well, what about these very large dominant players? Some people say monopolies. That's actually a key word there to think about. You know, in a lot of cases, we treat this as a tech problem. We treat this as a technological problem, when in fact it really has to do with an industrial policy problem. And the danger is, if you regulate it as a tech problem, regulation in the tech sector tends to promote the incumbents. It tends to encourage the market to centralize around the few players that are in place. And that's very bad for, you know, people who are here at this Web Summit. If you want a viable environment, if you want open protocols like Matrix to work well, then you've got to have a really viable market of lots of different players. And treating it as a tech regulation problem tends to encourage instead 5 players, and, you know, the regulators get them in a room and tell them what for. That's not really great for the internet, and that's one of the concerns that I have.
What do you think the focus for government should be? Because there's so much tech out there. Where on earth do they even start when they come to thinking about how they get involved in regulating it?
Basically I agree with Andrew in terms of if you're trying to make things work, it needs to be a double approach. Yes, of course, you need to take care of the big ones because they're so present. You cannot ignore them. But you have to be careful on how you implement it so the startups are not completely snowed under. Like implementation of GDPR in 2018 was quite an interesting exercise when you're a 20-people startup and just raised a bit of money, but not too much. So it's a hard balance to get right, and that's where basically having a better knowledge of the technology out there in the government would help in terms of tackling both sides, see the full picture, and pushing the ecosystem of startups locally to help them grow and actually embrace these new regulations is interesting. Awareness as well, overall, because these regulations often come either from the Digital Markets Act perspective, it's let's make sure that the ecosystem is flourishing, and then the online safety bill comes with like, we have to protect our population. And if we manage to get also the awareness in the technical world around privacy and security, then people developing the application can actually get it right from the first time. Like privacy should be by design any app you develop. And if you try to get this going, then your regulatory level will be much easier to manage because a lot of the basics of security and privacy and data management will be covered by the developers themselves who get it right from the get-go.
If we take an example of something that is on everybody's minds at the moment, which is AI. That's something that all governments are trying to grapple with. We've recently seen the AI summit take place in the UK. Biden's made some pronouncements on it. Are governments thinking about that in the right way? It seems to me at the moment they're very much want to be in the conversation, which is great, but they're also focused very much on frontier AI, as it's called, which again comes back to these big tech companies that are dominating it. So what have been your thoughts on the way governments have handled AI so far, Andrew?
I think one of the things that's really interesting about the way AI regulations are getting developed is very much the concern that I have also about the way internet regulation gets developed. There are these shiny things. You know, AI's been around for a long time. It's also a term that means about 19 things. Sometimes it's like, you know, shell scripts. Sometimes it's statistics in a big hat. Sometimes it's generative AI, and these are all quite different fields. The thing that got everybody excited was, you know, we gave them an interface. We gave them something to talk to. Now everybody's panicked. And that is not a great place for government to be making regulation from. The same thing happens with internet regulation, where suddenly people get very excited about something, and now you've got regulators who are trying to respond to something that seems like an urgent problem. Urgent problems make for bad regulation because they're done in a hurry, they're done without a lot of proper consultation, and they're done without a lot of deep understanding of what the thing is. And there's a hostility with the industry that is going to be regulated. And all of those things make for regulations that don't really fit the technology, that tend to encourage, or rather tend to discourage innovation, but tend to encourage you know, this sort of giantism in the industry. And I think that's not really great for the tech environment. It's probably not going to deliver the best tech that we have, and it's quite bad for many of the participants here who are probably trying to get a startup going.
Amandine, any thoughts on specific way that they've handled AI and whether they've even been thinking about the right problems to start with?
Yeah, basically trying to do something last minute is definitely going to create issues. So on the one hand, you want to make sure that whatever is being developed is not going all over the place. And for me, that really gets back to making sure, and that's probably less of a government problem, but making sure that people actually working on the tech are doing it the right way. And I don't think you can get regulations around that, but maybe awareness on the ecosystem from the government itself could help, or support, financial support to promote the training and learning around this specific area would help too.
Now, before we go, I just want to talk about something. In fact, this was mentioned in the last session, talking a bit about Russia. We face a new kind of threat to the internet, don't we, in terms of the way geopolitics is now front and center stage for technologists as much as it is for politicians. And we're facing a fragmented internet, which kind of goes against all the principles by which it was designed. So how do you think governments need to grapple with that problem?
Well, one of the problems that we are facing here is that while the internet is technically quite robust, politically it is fragile. It depends on the idea that more connectivity is better. And people talk about this as though the internet is going to fragment and we'll have, you know, one internet in, often you say China, one internet in Europe, and a different internet in the United States. And people need to get the idea that that's not like we're going to have different internets. We're not going to have the internet at all. The internet is either one thing that interoperates or we don't have the internet anymore. So when people try to, you know, break this up in various ways, what they're really trying to do is fix a social problem about, you know, social cohesion with a tech fix. The history of tech fixes for social cohesion is long and very, very bad. And I think that this is the, you know, this is really fundamentally the problem. People need to remember how valuable the internet is, how it kept us in communication all during the pandemic, how many marvelous things, you know, the very thing that we're doing right now, science fiction when I was growing up. And I think that that's something that we need to remember.
Do you feel like the internet is under threat, or do you think it's doing quite well for itself without any need for government intervention?
Well, the thing is, we definitely see a raise of, again, awareness on the data sovereignty. Like governments are trying to really push, like, I need to get control over my data. I need to make sure that this data is not being shared randomly anywhere, etc. And this is good, but yes, data sovereignty shouldn't mean actually fragmented the internet, etc. And the way the internet works is not managed by government. It's managed by non-profits like the Internet Society and open standards. So we need to continue pushing for these to exist and pushing for the open standards, making sure interoperability works. And if the tech works interoperably, it will work across the borders, and we need to maintain that. Otherwise, we've lost it, as Andrew says.
It seems that the original question was, is there a deficit of tech in government? And the answer is clearly yes. But if we were just to sum up, what do you think government should do to sort of fill that hole in the best way that they can? If there was just one thing that government should take on board, what would you say that would be? Amandine, let's start with you and finish with Andrew.
Whether it's like literally hiring a CTO or creating a group of technical experts within the government that can help both the regulatory angle and the kind of procurement angle, making sure that government is running on actual tech and is able to procure actual tech. Because selling to government, I can tell you, the framework contracts are made for tanks or whatever, not messaging apps. So I think that would be the kind of first thing, like let's create a technical excellence group in the government that can help and support the different functions.
And you're getting their own house in order. Would you say that that's what they need to do first, or?
Well, I think it's certainly one of the things. This really needs a multi-pronged approach because governments are large and sprawling organizations, larger and more sprawling even than the largest corporations in many cases. And what that means is that they've got many different internal tensions. And so you've got to have a sort of vision about what this is. But I also think that organizations like the Internet Society, I mean, this is part of what we exist for, is to try to help in these kinds of cases and to try to help them do the analysis that's necessary in order to see whether their technological plans are the right ones.
And so do you think that governments have got, I mean, it seems like there's tons of advice out there for government if they were only to listen, and there's conferences like this, but you don't really see politicians wandering around at events like this. Should we have more politicians coming to things like web summits to finish off with?
Maybe. I'll be honest with you, I would rather have policy advisors and senior civil servants and so on, because by the time the politician makes a statement, it's already too late to change the direction.
More speeches from politicians at Web Summit? Yes? No?
No, probably not necessarily, because I think it will, I think we need to take tech and bring it to government so that they get the real deal rather than just like the vibes of what is fancy these days. So I think it's more like, let's take the tech and bring it in.
Well, any government that's got an open vacancy for CTO would do well to speak to you two. I think there was a brilliant discussion. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and thank you to my guests for that lovely chat.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.